Good afternoon, everyone. I am Balaji. I am going to be the moderator for this session. I think Nilesh, hats off, you did a great job, despite the good lunch, in keeping all of us active and engaged. Now, this panel is standing in between you and the tea break, so we will also try to make it as interactive as possible. Let me give a prelude, of what this conversation is going to be about. And I'll start off with this, right? If I ask you, what are the three basic essentials of human life, which we all have, learned and understood? What are those three that comes to your top of your mind? Anybody? Any guesses? Exactly. Everybody would be thinking, or 9 out of 10 would be thinking roti, kapda and makan, right? So I asked this question to, my younger daughter. She's just 6 years old. She said three things, okay? Mobile, internet, and papa. So happy tears came out of me and I was wondering, oh, I'm still in the list. She said, no, because you give the money to buy the first two. Okay, that's her response. Now, the first two, the commonality in the first two, right? I'm trying to, correlate back to the topic itself, mobile and internet. How many of you have realized that what are we paying our mobile money for, the monthly bills that we pay for mobile and internet? What do the subscribers get for, right? And how that has transformed over the last maybe 10, 12 years? Again, any guesses? Do you even pay for your calls and messages today anymore? So what do you pay for then? So all of you pay for data plans, right? I mean, you have subscription plans for 90 days, 84 days, giving you 1.5 GB of data, 2 GB of data. Now, why do subscribers have to do this, right? Why this transformational shift in the way service providers, that to telecom as a service provider, has changed, right? Just a food for thought. And I'll also give you some more, information. ChatGPT, if ChatGPT was to be believed, almost 60% of human time goes in cleaning data, okay? That is the volume of data that we have. And using data, multi-billion-dollar companies with the valuation, exercise that Mr. Nilesh explained beautifully have already been built, okay? There are multi-billion-dollar companies sitting only on data. How many of you use credit cards? Nobody? Few of you? You get a lot of points for, making your own payments, which you normally do otherwise also, right? What do you think, could be credit's model? What are they sitting on? How are they going to even monetize? Right? I'm not their CFO, but I will not comment on it. But they're sitting with a lot of data of consumers, which is a wealth of information, right? They could monetize it at any point in time. There are billions and billions of dollars of business being built. Data is as powerful, if used effectively, can build billion-dollar companies. But if used in the most inappropriate way, it can be as punitive, and there are real-life examples. The reason one being in 2023 itself, where companies paid $1 billion of fine. So that's the power of data, right? And more regulatory frameworks, have come in place. GDPR is something that all the finance folks in the room would know how GDPR, has come into play and how that's changing, the use of privacy settings and data. iOS launched, a feature on, Apple, which is just to protect your data, consumer data and sensitivity around data. So these are just some of the prelude to what data is. And the irony is, it's so voluminous that we have already reached the cloud to store it, right? We no longer can store it on earth. That's how volume data is, right? Now, what we will do in this session with two experts from the industry, between them having almost 40 plus years of experience, is understand how they have used data more effectively and powerfully as, in their positions as CFO to make crucial decisions, right? So I will, drive the conversation around that. I mean, more than being theoretical, I would like to share, I like them to share real life examples of, how they manage the situation so that it benefits all of us. Thank you, Ramesh and Swati, for taking your time. I'll start with Ramesh first and then move, back and forth between the two of you. Ramesh, can you throw some light on your view on, effective or robust data structure?
Yeah, thanks, Balaji.
In forecasting and planning, yeah.
Yeah. So I'll speak about the recent Zepto examples, right? In any organization which grows much faster, It grew from 50 stores in 1.5 years back to about 250 stores, doing close to $1 billion GMV. Initial part of any startup building is on the PMF. How do you find a product market fit, customer side, and then finance catches up to that speed at a later stage, right, typically. And during this phase, when you look back at, and every function is trying to optimize on either the growth, marketing, or on sales and profitability, this is where the data gets broken in the beginning itself, right? So first role and how I have started, and this is exactly what I have done is first to baseline, right? In terms of baseline, where we are in the entire data journey, for the same definition, marketing might use differently than a finance versus a business teams. So first step I did was to just go and baseline how broken, how siloed it is. Second step is to identify who's the owner of that metric, right? If GMV, what does GMV mean, right? It can be with cancellation, without cancellation, dispatch, after return. Like there are multiple variants of it, and then every team might be using it differently. So to establish who's the owner, baseline first, ownership, and the third thing is standardization definitions, right? Across the organization, how do you define and standardize, and which data module it will come from, right? In terms of queries, standardizing it, and then establishing a protocol in terms of reporting framework. So, and in establishing a standard protocol would be bringing data layer around it, ERPs. So we are in the process of implementing ERP, putting the database completely together, right? So only when these foundational things are clear, articulated system controls in place, is when you can use advanced analytics features to your own benefit. If not, everybody will be working in there. There will be a lot of speed, but there's no velocity because the direction is all around the place. So that's how it's in the process of in its journey.
Well said, well said. Yeah, there will be speed, but no velocity. Yeah, that's a good one to note down. Swati, I mean, would you want to add your views on the same topic?
Yeah, why not? I think Ramesh has very beautifully put it in terms of that first thing to break the silos when it comes to data is the culture. And the culture of an organization, if it is that even when, say, the machine learning, AI, RPA was not there, if that culture is there that when we forecast, when we plan, it has to be agnostic of which function you belong to, but it is more dependent on how do we see. So basically when you are looking at the GMV, when you're looking at the revenue per se, which is the starting point, the fuel for your business, the first thing it is highly dependent on is your customer. How do you completely make it specific cohort-based customer-centric data? How do you see that which customer buckets are leaky bucket? How do you see where, in classical businesses, where the overdues actually go up, like in telecom, where you see that what kind of a selection, whether premium, economy, whether it is a blend, which really attracts the customer, like in e-commerce, what really, make them take those decisions. So the starting point is when agnostic of which function you are, when you start exchanging the data with full transparency. And earlier we being finance people and we have been leading this process for so long, it used to be that the visibility used to be limited to us, that one function is saying that this will give me a very high growth revenue. The other function, say a customer experience and a CX would say that this will lead to a lot of, later on after sale issues. And that will lead to a lot of, cash outflow. There is another segment which can show that, how at the end of the day, the entire production line can be choked if we start concentrating only on what the sales and marketing is saying that should be my SKU. So I'm just trying to touch upon all the industries where it is very critical that where finance you to absorb it and see that how do we correct the entire data in terms of what should be absorbed, what should be brought on the same page by having the functional leads into the room. That can be now done even more seamlessly, I would say, thanks to the entire cloud that you referred to, that entire big data, heavy data, can actually be now seamlessly can be, accessed, seamlessly can be absorbed. But the one thing which even now, comes into as a roadblock is one source, one data. I mean, every function has its own way to, cull out the data, how to, kind of absorb it, how to present it. Data can be interpreted in 100 different ways. So that is the challenge which I would say that when you see a data, it has to be one source, one data kind of a concept should be more propagated. That is what I have been doing in multiple organizations that I have been associated with. And especially in e-commerce, it comes very, very as a critical, dimension. ETL, which we all know is more to do with extract the data, transform the common ones into a common pool, and then put it on a warehouse cloud. That is something that really helps for the access of the data, breaking the silos, and then start consuming it for the correct forecast and planning.
Thank you, Swati. Well said. Going back to Ramesh, while there is a wealth of data that's available, right? As a CFO, sometimes you have to look beyond the data, right? You cannot base your decisions just based on the data that's available. How important do you think predictive analysis is, in financial planning?
Absolutely, right. If you look at, especially on the online side where there's significant amount of data, but in terms of, that's the past, right? And how do you correlate that to the future? Definitely needs predictive analysis. I'll give you a couple of areas where I've worked deeply in the last couple of weeks, right? One is on customer churn. How do you understand the customer retention tool? When do you see, what are the signals where it gives you a clear signal saying that now the customer is not going to repeat, right? So first it starts with heuristics in terms of putting your hypothesis, right? And then testing those hypotheses along with a control set. And then once your models are framed, it can be regressive analysis, random forest model, there are multiple models which are standard. You put those variables into those models, and then it will throw out in terms of, okay, this is the cohort of customers, because of this are the 5 signals not going to return next week, right? In a grocery business, every week you have to look at retention. And what are those things, 2 or 3 fixes you have to do this week so that the customer will return next week, right? So this is just beyond the historical, is where the predictive analysis will come. And what's the role of CFO here? So it can be done by a business analyst and those things. The role of CFO is the vantage point, which I'm sitting at. I can work with the analytics team, the business team, the supply chain team, right? And then stitch it together, right? So vantage point and stitching it together is where the role of CFO comes in. And if you can, second thing is understanding the business deeply. It cannot be, if you marry analytics and just be purely analytical and not understand the business, the times have changed from a controllership to depth. Everybody knows that in terms of understanding business levers. So the finance guy in the room has to be part of those business discussions and the predictive analysis, and also champion the role of automation and champion the role of bringing in newer technologies. The best thing is there are multiple startups today working on AI and predictive analysis. The best thing you can do is give a PO to them, right? So they can work with you and help you on multiple analysis. And then over a period of time, take those small decisions which will finally add into your positive flywheel.
Thanks, Ramesh. I'll come back to the last point, again to you. But hearing your thoughts, Swati, on in your various roles, right? How have you used predictive analysis, or do you even had an opportunity to use predictive analysis rather than just backing on data?
Yeah, sure. See, predictive analysis, as we all understand, it has a huge array of precedence as a data and the current data as well. There has to be a little bit of length and depth of the past data, which helps you in terms of any kind of a predictive modeling. And especially in telecom as well as in e-commerce, there's a lot of predictive modeling that we use because we had that kind of a data at least now, which helps us to understand what Ramesh mentioned, the churn part of it. the customer acquisition is one of the biggest costs that we all face in any industry, but more so in such service industry, data service industry, e-commerce industry, where you should be very much aware that at the end of the day, if you are only looking at data which is very, very current in nature, maybe you are not looking at a trend, and that predictive analytics to have a prescriptive, kind of analytics decision making will not help. So what I have always been doing is that the data which actually should be in the system, it can be as simple rudimentary as maybe a age-old spreadsheet kind of a way, but the data should be rich. It should be absolutely kept in mind, because it's garbage in, garbage out. One should be very truthful when at the end of the day that data is getting as a repository and getting consumed. And what predictive analysis has helped me throughout this journey is the right pricing point. I mean, as we all know, I was saying, that customer cohort is very important to understand. Every customer behaves in a different way, churns out for a different reason, has a different life cycle, and has a very different price point to make that decision to go with you or not. So hence that pricing decision really helps you in terms of segmentization of customers in different buckets, where I know that at the end of the day, it can be my top line currently, but very soon it will come back in terms of an after sale kind of a cost. It can come back in terms of a customer grievance or a CX cost to me. It can really come back in terms of overdues to me. You should be able to have that, sensitivity and ability to understand that through the past data and the current data, integrating it in a predictive analysis. And data is still getting matured, so prescriptive analysis is yet to be seen. But yes, I keep on doing the predictive analysis across the teams so that we know the right point of attracting the customer.
Got it. I'll just add a point there. I mean, we all, I don't know how many of us are in service industry, and how many of us use Meta as a platform to acquire customer, which Swati touched upon, right? That's the most important aspect of building business, which is the CAC, customer acquisition cost. Most of us might use, Meta, Google ads, as a channel to reach out to the consumer, right? Now, how does this model work, right? I mean, we have literally tried building 0 to 1, journeys, and I'm part of one such journey now where we are learning how to use that channel, right? The key insight for that platform to work is the data that is fed into the system, right? Because when you're starting something new, when you're trying to acquire the customer, you don't know, which is the right set of customer that you should target. So you go in with certain assumptions, on the platform to reach out to a target audience, saying, okay, my target age group is 18 to 34. I'm targeting, these 5-tier cities. Then, this is the purchase pattern they should have brought from, or bought previously from these brands. So you give a very wide range of, input metrics, and the machine learning behind this learns from the data. Once you start acquiring customer, that data goes back into these systems to make the system more intelligent in, in targeting the right consumer. So that actually is a very, valid point that Swati touched upon. The power of data, it's garbage in, garbage out, right? If I don't keep refining, right, I may run an experiment with this first set of segments that I said, then I have to experiment with a different set of, parameters to see what's working better. Where is my ROAS better, ROI better? And you keep feeding that data back into these tools, which will help you give the best ROI. Thanks for bringing that. Ramesh, going back to you, right? You did touch upon in the end, that there are agencies or, people who do this, use machine learning and tools to refine data. How much do you think, is the influence of technology on data analysis, right? Is there a threat? I mean, all of us would agree that we are masters in Excel, if not experts. We use a lot of, data churning on Excel. How much of machine learning influence is coming on the entire planning and forecasting process?
Yeah, see, every company is in a very different maturity process, right? And companies which were built online have a slightly higher maturity because they don't have the transition impact. And fundamentally, I believe, right, the entire product tech of your company is going to non-linearly change this game, right? So there is a lot of linear process improvements you can do. But beyond that, if it has to happen, it has to happen through a product and tech team of your company. And this is where the role of finance also comes in place, where if you're looking at your balance sheet and P&L and looking at which are the levers which you need to improve upon. And I'll give a simple example, which I was talking to one of the AI companies in last 1 month, is on automation of accounts payable, right? The entire module, right? Right from OCR technology is now changing to ICR technology, where the predictability, the extraction is much, much seamless. From a 50, 60, 70 invoice per day productivity is now becoming instant availability. 3-way checks are now becoming 6-way checks and 9-way checks, the way you want to configure it. So the new age startups, and the role of a CFO is to look at every single line item, every single area where there are a lot of innovation and activities happening across you. How do you work with the ecosystem and bring those ecosystem benefits back to you, right? So I think it's a significant shift which is happening, and any CFO is progressive, his ability to extract those benefits is important.
I agree also, Ramesh, right? I mean, there's a lot of digital innovation that's coming in finance and in the role of a CFO. I think it was covered in, the second panel discussion that we also had, right? The use of ML techniques and, artificial intelligence in the way we look at data, the way we want to consume data is becoming more and more prevalent. Yeah, I do agree. Let me put you in a spot now, Swati. I want you to give me a real life example of where you have overpowered, the data analysis and taken a decision, right?
I would not shy away from saying it happens quite a few times. And again, it is agnostic of which industry you are in, because see, one of the facts which remains at least with the finance fraternity is that when you are looking at a data, it has to be seen in multidimensional way. And when we say multidimensional, again, say it in 2D or 3D will not help in terms of if I'm planning to outsource one activity, because I'm seeing that it will help in, the breakages and say the frauds to come down. But at the same time, if I see the spectrum of the data in terms of, say, for 5, 6, 7, 8 months or a year data if I start correlating it with the customer experience, and if I see a delta which I am not able to correlate, I will have to override the data, right? The predictive analysis data. That time you have to go back to the drawing board. You need to understand, and that has happened, you need to understand that if there is a customer voice which is not corroborating with the kind of, frauds that you are seeing going down or the kind of breakages going down, is it then making sense? Then you start interacting with all the multifunctions, you start to reinstate the data and start seeing it maybe in a 5D kind of a dimension. So it keeps happening. One thing which comes very closely to my mind is, other than e-commerce, in telecom also, it clearly happened. We were looking at, again, the churn data, and we were very, very focused on the fact that postpaid is what will help us in not only aggregating and accelerating the ARPU, what we used to call in terms of average revenue per user, but it will also help us to bring the stickiness, and the churn will not be there. However, when we started to look very recent data in terms of what happens in terms of cost of doing business, do we see the overdues going up? Do we see a complete fleet engine of people to be deployed to have those recoveries? Our entire decision making started again getting segmented. You have to split it, which customers you can actually go for a postpone, which you cannot. That data cannot throw at one go. And that is where you start seeing it in a multi-layer.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, and Ramesh, sorry, you want to add something?
Yeah, I'm sure I had a few examples, right? If you look at how, for example, if there is no data or limited set of Zepto is a fairly new company, and especially on festive, let's say Raksha Bandhan is coming. How do I plan for how much of Raksha Bandhan inventory I need to stock? versus what was done, which was fairly in a very different setup. It was aggressively growing last year. Now it's still growing. How do I plan for inventory, right? So in that sense, there's no sanctity of what's available from the past, and hence you have to derive from external variables. Ultimately, it's about variables. Sometimes, if you're looking at your own sample set, that sample set itself is limited and inaccurate, right? And then you expand the sample set and suddenly you realize, you know what we are looking at is very, very small number, and the audacity has to be much larger in those things. So often when you don't get a clear view, go back to first principles, look at external variables, connect that back and take that call. I'll give one more example where we were looking at store performance, right? Sales per, orders per store. And there's some stores where data was saying that these are performing, these are not performing, the sales has not increased significantly. Then ability to look at, okay, store is a store. Store may not be same store, may not be same store. One may be 3,000 square feet, other may be 5,000 square feet. Right? Then I said, okay, let's do sales per square feet. Then the sales per square feet, okay. It can also, now I have a 3,000 square feet store in one location and 3,000 square feet in another location. But is it same or different? Depends, right? In one of the stores, I have 𝗣𝗹𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃, which is beverages, coffee, and those things, and the other store I don't have. So the expectation of that equivalent store is slightly very different, right? So the 𝗣𝗹𝗃𝗃𝗃 is supposed to do much more because I've invested a lot more capex and have a different segment in that 3,000 square feet here versus there. So looking purely on a single axis, looking at data, it might say saying that the stores are not performing, but if you start normalizing it and looking at it, then it becomes a lot more clearer.
I agree, Ramesh, and well said. Actually, you spoke about external variable. In any service industry, right, the real validation or real input of data comes from the actual consumers, right? And whoever is closest to the consumers gets the first-hand information of what's going to work, what's not going to work. Now, how do you, mature your data model or data analysis model, with that information, rather than just going from what's available from the past trend? Past trend, yes, it's important to base your decision on, but as much as, important is what's happening or what's going to happen, in the closest, circle of consumers. That's also very important. Now, Ramesh, one more question to you on situations where, from your example, from your own real life example, where you have used the power of data and where you believe, the outcome or the decision was, very successful. From either, and you were in Flipkart in the early days of Flipkart, right? So where e-commerce as an industry itself was new to the country, you must not have had any precedences to, base on. So how did you overcome that situation, and any decision that you used data which helped you, get success?
Yeah, and we all have Flipkart, like it's the in-house team, I guess, ex-Flipkarts. So in terms of, I'll give you an example in 2015 where we're building marketplace model. The rate cards were fairly new in terms of how much to charge, what to charge, right? So there was no precedence in India. Then looked around in China for Tmall and Taobao and Amazon for US. But looking at that, first step is to get to first principles. That's where you put those 3, 4, 5 points, and then look at non-financial signals or inputs if you have. If you don't have financial ones, at least non-financial data points where it can be around customer ratings of a SKU. If you look at customer rating SKU, if you make a finance P&L by customers who have rated SKU for 4 to 5, 3 to 4, 2 to 3, right? It clearly is telling you. And what we have seen in my Myntra days was if it's rated 4 to 5, it's invariably lower returns, invariably higher profitability. And if it is rated less than 3, then you see all the inventory which gets stuck with the sellers, or the profitability is much lower. So it's basically non-financial signals and data is available for you. How do you consume it within this setup? So that was a fantastic work which we done in terms of doing P&L by SKUs and having a then listing down, okay, these are 100 SKUs which are not doing well, have a get well plan or kill the SKU, right? So either you figure out, okay, the catalog was wrong, or the content was wrong, or the size fit, anything else was wrong, either have a plan to correct it or then kill it. We saw a significant shift, building a listing quality score, basis some of these non-financial signal, and then driving that in your O2Bs, right? Open to buy process. When you, as a finance guy, you approve saying that, okay, you are open to buy for X crores. In that, how do you build the smart PO checks along with some of those signals which you have got? So this is a closed looping of building non-financial into financial, and then understanding where it's working, and then closed looping with the next upstream process. And so I think that has significantly worked for me at Myntra, and when building on marketplace model in very, very early days, is basically doing it yourself, right? In terms of just going deep. And one of the things which a lot of time gets missed out, and I think that's worked very well for me as an advantage, is knowing the mix impact, right? A lot of variables. If you do an averaging of a lot of things, the mixes kind of tend to see, okay, yeah, we are doing better, but if you adjust it for mix, invariably you'll get the real answer saying that no, it's not, it's completely screwed.
True, very true.
So if you can consciously look at all your financials, data points everywhere, and try to look for mix impact and isolate that impact, you get to a much better decision making.
True, well said, Ramesh. Last question to you, Swati. How do you balance, data with intuition?
I think there is one very big philosophy which comes into the picture, is that when we say intuition, or when we say gut feeling, or whatever we say, as when we start growing to leadership,
instinct.
Swati instinct, or woman instinct, or sixth sense, gut feeling, whatever we call it, it is never it is a metaphoric way of saying that the experience of the data or consequence of several investments or several decisions that we have been taking with multiple, levers. It can be customer, it can be a middle line, it can be a, cost of doing business, it can be anything. The experience which comes, that when I looked at the data with 3 of the aspects, and I did not, or I overlooked, say, a few metrics, like I said, it can be different industries, different thing. It can be overdue, it can be fraud, it can be the entire machine downtime of a particular, manufacturing units. If we do not see that, and we start consuming the data in terms of only customer metric, then it is a wrong way of proceeding to take the right decision, or what we call as a faster ROI towards that decision. Hence, at any point of time, even now, when the data is substantiated to a large extent, because there is a precedence, there is a AI, ML machine learning and AI that we all have to certain extent in our workplaces, still when you are looking at a data, you need to have that, and I keep on doing it, whether it is for, I'll give you an example, there was, supply chain is the backbone of e-commerce, right? And at the end of the day, for supply chain, manpower is the biggest, maker or breaker. And when you start looking at manpower, how it is going to the doorstep, what is the customer experience, what is that point of, potential earning that they will, be driven with. When you start looking at the data, you cannot blindly take a decision. Because just like customer, you have to split it into that, what is their productivity that actually is getting impacted due to what all reasons. It can be distance. It can be a repeated, customer cohort where people are not present when you are, going at the doorstep. It can be a geography, which can be more like a slums. In Mumbai, there are a lot of such. Where you go, you always face this challenge that you cannot find, where you need to deliver. These connotations are still not baked in data. And we can start deciding that, one rate, one goal, one earning potential will help every manpower. That's a wrong way of moving. And when we started looking at the data, and I said that we need to look at other dynamics, operations comes into the picture very highly in these things, design principles comes very handy in these things, and you start interpreting it with your experience, with the go-to-market strategy that you also would have gone and, kind of associated with the manpower who are facing what all level of challenges, what are the big 5 things that they are facing, and then you start taking decisions in terms of what should be the right rate card. What should be, whether it should be a fixed, variable, multiple geography, multiple rates, all these things comes because you refer the data and you use your human intelligence, which, as we all, are evolving, the data is evolving. This is called the decision intelligence, which very soon all these human cognitive things also will be built in the machine learning, and those simulators can be run. But currently it is not that evolved, and hence you have to take a pit stop and you need to decide with your human influence and the intuitiveness.
The way I look at intuition, right, is very simple. It's like overnight success took 10 years. Intuition is like ability to visualize and visualize and make dots and connect the dots. And that can happen only when you're working on the ground. If it's supply chain, you're going to the FC warehouse, you're looking at how things are happening, and then you're able to visualize in terms of how step 1 to step 2 to step 3. There's no substitute for that. Right? On ground, visualize. The moment you're able to visualize the numbers in your head and ability to create dots, internal and taking external dots, and ability to create, then you come out as very intuitive person. But if you, for yourself, it was logical, right? Or kaise hota, like this is how it should be.
Absolutely.
That's intuition for me, right? So there's no substitute. Just work on the ground, build that kind of experience, and visualize the numbers.
Well said. So one last quick fire question to both of you. Having spoken so much about the importance of data and the need for the data analysts, would your team have data analysts or CAs?
So my team has a very good combination. So, the way Flipkart, I would say, not only Flipkart, but the nascent, I call telecom, all the D2C, all very nascent industries. The way we have evolved, the organization couldn't have so many CAs at all level, right? And that is exactly why the finance is built in a very right way. So there are people who have exposure to operations. There are people who are purely in analytics. There are people who are chartered accountants, of course. But how to read, how to collate the data, how to disintegrate them, where to integrate them and, sit for hours to get that sanctity check done, and how to use it as a decision-making tool. That is actually broken, or maybe, I would not use the word broken, that is deliberately segregated in terms between these 3 fraternity of people which I said. Operations exposure, analytics, and CA. And that is where, results start getting driven. I'll give you a simple example. Very recently we understood, in supply chain, transport plays a huge role in terms of, from point A to C, from all the hubs, everywhere you have to connect, right? And if you are completely dependent on, say, just one ERP, one tool, or sometimes even manual, that what is my load optimization that I am doing on a vehicle, or whether the vehicle is present or not, what kilometers it is running. With all those things, when we started doing the data crunching, data absorption and consolidation, we clearly understood there are quite a few flaws, which with human effort or with Excel sheet or a spreadsheet we cannot take care of. And there is where Ramesh said, we kind of took a decision of build or buy. Build will always take its own time. It needs a lot of data sanctity. Whereas when you are buying, in terms of all the startups which are running and that there is a tool, when you buy it, you are kind of accelerating your journey and you can segregate your team. One will be monitoring, one will be, doing the sanctity check of the data, and one will be constantly going on the ground to check the data variance which is getting thrown. Is it to be interpreted the way we are interpreting? And let me tell you, the third team which I said, that keeps on giving, betterment in terms of what kind of a data should go in the system, because we come to know that the way we are reading it, it's not right. It's not that a vehicle is not coming or a vehicle is running for X kilometer and the data thrown is Y kilometer. It is because of, again, multiple challenges and interventions which we are not able to do, maybe from the operation side, design side and all. And that gives us that input that we have to change those principles and those processes. So that is how my team is like spread into multiple genre of
Got
things.
it. And your words, last words, Ramesh, on how to build the team.
But when you ask about CA or analyst, right, I think that's a skill set. So there's a mix. But what's also important is the mindset and the tool sets. Right? From a mindset perspective, what we have seen is every single person in the team understands and is able to write the queries themselves. Right? So that becomes the tool set in terms of ability. First is to learn and be independent themselves, write those queries, SQL, very basic, like if, then else, nothing more, similar to Excel, but more query language. So CA or no CA, MBA, writing queries is important. Second thing is in terms of the system mindset, in terms of looking at data points and evaluating an analytical mindset. For everything, it's either a technical work on the controllership side or a tax side versus on the business finance side. It's more complex problem solving and figuring it out. Sometimes hustling, sometimes analytical. So it's that mindset which is important for anybody to grow and leveraging all the tool sets which is available across the company. So finally, it has, for people to grow, skill sets is just the entry thing, but beyond that, it has to be both other sets.
Got it. Thanks, Ramesh. Do we have time for some questions, Varsha?
We can take one.